What's up, guys? Justin Morgan here, Carved Up Vegan Muscle, and the topic for today, I got a question from somebody asking about training volume, and I thought it was an excellent question. He asked, what is more taxing overall to your body? Would it be like high reps or low reps? I think he was noticing that I had been doing more high reps, and I had mentioned that it was somewhat taxing on my body. And the answer is that it really could be either. There are programs that will call for you to do, well, quickly, the answer is that it depends on the overall volume that you do. So you could do, say, 16,000 pounds worth of workload in, I don't know, it depends on how strong you are, but over a given number of sets and reps using sets of 5. And you could also do that same amount of workload doing sets of 10, 8, 12, whatever. So when we take the amount of sets times reps times weight that we are using, that gives us a specific amount of workload. And that is the overall amount of work that your body is doing. And I'm sure that there is some variance amongst doing one or the other, but it really seems to be like that the total workload that you do is the biggest factor to overall fatigue that we see in our body. And we need that fatigue in order to induce muscle growth. I've mentioned several times in videos here in the last few weeks, Renaissance Periodization and Dr. Mike Israetel. He has a great series at his YouTube channel, Renaissance Periodization, talking about training factors for raw powerlifting or something like that. It's not too hard to find if you just go and look through the videos. I don't remember if that's the exact title or how he identifies it in the series, but he has multiple series going on, so you just kind of have to look through there and find that. I do recommend watching it, but one of them he outlines overall training volume, and he has some really great things to kind of bring out. But what I will say for this video is that usually what we see is that overall volume is more taxing on the body, but it's also the biggest factor in inducing muscle growth. So the more volume that we see somebody using, usually the more muscle that they grow, and using higher reps is usually at some point a little easier to get more volume in, because it's easier to do 5 sets of 10 and get an insurmountable volume than it is to do 10 sets of 5, and that takes longer, and the weights are just going to be heavier. But to some degree, we need those heavier weights as well, and he actually identifies that in his video series as well, talking about strength. We need areas of strength and overall work volume to be done. So you can't really just only do hypertrophy work and get the most out of it. Now, there are people that only do strength work, and they seem to do quite well, but usually they're in the same way. Once they get into the kind of the intermediate and advanced levels of lifting, they are also mixing up the volume. You can mix up the volume by one program that I saw used 15 sets of 1 in the first week at 65% of your 1 rep max. So the training volume in that was very, very high, even though they were only doing sets of 1. Whereas, like the Juggernaut method that I've been running lately, the very first week in the 10s phase, you end up doing 5 sets of 10, which is also, and I think it's at 60% of your 1 rep max or something like that, but it's also very high volume in that way, and it is very draining, very taxing on the body. So, really when we look at that, there's no real finite answer to it, but one thing that I do consider, one factor that you should consider in your training, is the overall volume that you're doing. If the volume is really high and you're getting really worn down and you're not really progressing, then maybe you need to decrease the volume and increase the intensity for a little while, work more specifically on strength stuff. So 5x5s really, 5x5 type training programs like Strong Lifts or Starting Strength, which I like, Jason Blaha's 5x5 program, they are relatively high volume, because even though you may not do a ton of volume on one day. You're only doing 5 sets of 5 for squats, or some people might say for your legs. They might look at it in terms of a muscle group rather than a lift. But when you accumulate that over the course of a week, and you're doing 5 by 5 on Monday, 5 by 5 on Wednesday, 5 by 5 on Friday, you end up doing 10. You end up doing 15 sets of 5. So that's actually quite a bit of volume when you look at it from that way. Not to mention you're also doing deadlifts, and to some degree, like the rows are working your hamstrings as well. If you're doing pin lay rows off the floor, or rows in a way that doesn't support your upper body in some way. So you're getting a lot of carryover from lift to lift on how they are working your body. So the volume really accumulates that way. But so a lot of people will recommend that you go from like 5 by 5 and you work up to a given workload. Usually they want you to see like 3 of the either the 20 kilo or the 45-pound plates on each side of your squat. They want to see 4 plates on each side for your deadlift and 2 plates on each side for your bench pressing before you really start to look on to intermediate programs. So at that point you've been accumulating volume, and your volume is fairly high over time, and then they say go into something like the Mad Cow 5 by 5. Now the Mad Cow 5 by 5, you don't do 5 sets of 5. You only work up to 1 heavy set of 5. So the volume is much lower, and it allows you to increase your strength much better that way. So if you run sorry about that, my iPad actually died. The battery ran out right in the middle of the video, so I had to stop, plugged it in. I'm coming back the next day now to finish the conversation. But what I was saying with the volume was that if you go from a relatively high volume program, like a 5 by 5 type program, into a relatively lower volume, higher intensity program where the percentages of weights of your 1 rep max is much higher, then you are generally going to see an actualization of strength come as a result of that. So whatever you're doing for 5 sets of 5, if you do 1 set of 5, you're going to be able to do quite a bit more weight to do that. So if we're thinking like programs like the Juggernaut Fitness Method, which I've been following, it gives some really good examples. What you end up doing is, I think he has you do 6 sets of 5 during the 5s phase, and there's a 10s phase, an 8s phase, a 5s phase, and a 3s phase, and each one of them has different things. But when you're in the accumulation phase, the very first phase of that week, so every wave, the 5s wave, you end up doing 6 sets of 5 at 70%. And that's going to be a lot of volume. Well, then you have an intensification phase where the weights get a little bit heavier and you only do 4 sets of 5. And then you have one where you go up to all 1 out high rep set, 1 all out set where you're doing 85%, and ideally you'll do that for 5 or maybe 6 or 7 reps. If you do 6 or 7, then it means you've added weight to your 1 rep max. So 85% though would be about what you would get for 1 set of 5. 70% would be what you would get for 5 sets of 5, or in this case 6 sets of 5. So you can see that there's a much different, and those percentages are based off your 1 rep max. So you can see that there's a much different, a big difference, between 15% difference actually in what you are typically able to do for many sets of 5 versus 1 set of 5. Of course, we're all at different capacities. We come from different backgrounds, different training backgrounds. So maybe somebody has a really big endurance aspect and they might actually be able to do a higher percentage for many sets over and over and over again, just because they have that capacity to do so. But that's not the norm that we're talking about. The norm, what the majority of all lifters will kind of experience there. So I think I pretty much summed up the question of volume. So you guys had questions on volume. That hopefully kind of identifies some of the variables that you might see. And I will post the link to Dr. Israetel's a series on raw powerlifting. Even if you're not interested in powerlifting, that would be a great resource to look into if you are interested in variables surrounding training volume and increasing strength and muscle. So that's it. As always, guys, thanks for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, and comment in the section below. Talk to you guys later.